As a proud Mbarbrum woman, I want to acknowledge that we gather today on sacred, stolen and unceded Aboriginal lands. Land that always has and always will belong to First Nations people and communities. I acknowledge the owners of country, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and their neighbours to the south, the Bunurong. I pay my deepest respects to elders, past and present, and all my brothers and sisters here in this room today. And of course, I acknowledge you all and the many, many shared lineages that bring life and energy into this space. I've come to realise that anyone can demonstrate leadership, an act of courage, even when faced with tremendous adversity. And that leadership has nothing to do with the title you possess or the authority you maintain. Whenever I think of a leader, I think of my family, my matriarchy. In 1965, 2 years before the landmark referendum that finally acknowledged Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in the Constitution, my nan, in haste from the shock and horror that was unfolding before her, said, "Take care, be brave," to my mum, before she and my aunties and uncles were shoved into a police car and sent to one of Australia's most violent orphanages. My mum was only 8 years old when she was taken from her mum, 8 years old when the sexual and physical violence began, 8 years old when she first entered the workforce as what was then called a domestic, but was in fact a slave. Or at least we think she was 8. Mum never had a birth certificate. My nan gave birth to her in a sugarcane field in far north Queensland. Nan didn't make it to hospital because she too was working on the fringes of society, helping to build this colony. During this dark time in Australia's history, the primary aim of child removal and enslavement was assimilation of my people, and it was done so through dutiful employment, to have our knowledge systems, our ways of knowing and being and doing ripped from us, like my mum being ripped from her mum's arms. But sadly, mum's story isn't unique. It's one shared by countless of our people right across this country. But nan's words, take care, be brave, they have always baffled yet inspired me. Sure, we often understand those words when they're packaged in a cute hashtag or meme, but living that as an Aboriginal woman, living that requires us to confront a much deeper socialisation that choosing to take care of ourselves and to love ourselves is perhaps the bravest thing that we can do in a world that demands so much from us and seldom loves us back. The sad reality is that for me and many of my people, we don't have the privilege to take our foot off the accelerator, to sit back and relax, not even for a minute. And trust me, it's not because we're not reading enough BuzzFeed articles on self-care. Am I right? It's because there's a myth that the injustices of the past have somehow ceased, that the unfair distribution of labour in the colony, which we feel in our bones, has ended. And it hasn't. And this load is contributing to our burnout. The term burnout seems to get casually thrown around like confetti these days, but what exactly is it? Well, it's really not an easy question to answer because it's something that even puzzles clinicians and experts to define. Its origins, the research, haven't deviated much since it was widely introduced by German psychologist Hermann Freudenberg in 1974. Commonly referred to as the people helping people syndrome, we know burnout to be categorised by 3 things. An emotional exhaustion, something which we've probably all experienced in the last few years as we've navigated the pandemic. A depersonalisation or detachment from our thought and body processes, or a lack of empathy. And lastly, a diminished sense of personal accomplishment, a what's the point kind of feeling. The World Health Organization has recently classified burnout as a syndrome which results from chronic workplace stress which has not been successfully managed. Burnout also shares similarities with other mood disorders such as anxiety and depression and physical conditions such as chronic fatigue. And because of this, burnout is still not considered a standalone medical condition. In fact, even after decades of being known in existence, it's still considered very hard to isolate, diagnose, and treat. The predicament I have witnessed as a First Nations coach and consultant when examining burnout is the blurring of boundaries between home, the workplace, and the work that is expected of us while we live in an anti-Black world. We're trying to decipher our roles, our vision, our responsibilities, all while juggling full-time employment, managing a house, or providing part-time community care, school councils, footy carnivals, local councils, plus slotting in grassroots activism every other weekend, all while trying to live out our best life on a vision board. It sounds exhausting, right? Well, that's because it is. The First Nations coaching and consulting team I lead are currently exploring how widespread the issue of burnout is and the many structural and precipitating personality and psychological factors it involves. Using the Maslow Burnout Inventory, a psychological assessment instrument that comprises of 22 symptom items, we have recently surveyed 262 Torres, Strait and Aboriginal people across Australia. The initial findings are fascinating and theories will continue to be tested in ongoing phases of the project. Of the 262 respondents, almost 85% identified as female. Roughly 40% had 1 to 2 dependents on average. And the kicker, 91% took on an additional 5 or more paid and unpaid hours of labour supporting their community every single week. And this was done so on top of their 38-hour working week. This supports that for my people, we for tens of thousands of years have understood communities not to be a noun, but instead a verb, a doing word. For us, it's not just a moral and ethical choice to be in community with one another. Our survival as a people, like almost all living species on the planet, is predicated on our ability to adapt and our ability to work together. The strength of our movement is the strength of our relationships with each other. The 3 most common forms of labour taken on each week included participating on a community board, volunteering at a local Aboriginal cooperative or grassroots organisation, and a staggering 65% provided support to an elder, friend or community member who was experiencing tough times. Not surprisingly, almost 65% of survey respondents also reported feeling ongoing exhaustion because of their work and family commitments. But when we asked them to describe what the exhaustion felt like, almost all spoke about a relentless fatigue, a heaviness in mind, body, and spirit. Many spoke about the physical sensations such as pains in their body, especially their neck and their back, an inability to sleep, hypertension, and low immune systems. Then there were the all-consuming emotions, the anger, the guilt, the worry, these feelings of emptiness. Many described an oscillation between hyperarousal, doing way too much, and a defeat from feeling like they were not accomplishing anything at all. Overall, the initial data is so far confirming the 2 or many worlds that First Nations people refer to, and somehow supporting the notion that this is like normalised, that we're expected to navigate the duality and the complexities of these worlds politely, with ease and grace, and of course, zero rage or frustration. Burnout doesn't just affect First Nations people adversely though, it is undoubtedly intersectional. According to a recent study from Deloitte Global, 50% of women all across the globe have recently experienced burnout. And it's something many of our health workers have also experienced in the wake of the pandemic, according to Edith Cowan University. This highlights that there are no amount of downward dogs or self-help books that is ever going to be able to comprehensively treat burnout, for it's deeply rooted in how modern societies view work and care responsibilities. Understanding the nuance of work-life balance isn't a new conversation. It's probably one you're all attempting to have with your boss right now. The pandemic has radically transformed how we view workplaces and to some degree, the fabric of societies. It has shown that compassion and agility is what makes us human. And in the workplace, it increases performance and drives outcomes. Being Aboriginal, we know, our people know that time is not linear and the past and the present are intrinsically linked. For me, it's knowing that it's not just me on this stage. It's my mum, my nan, my siblings. The wealth and the prosperity that was brought on by the Industrial Revolution in the 18th century or colonisation brought with it Aboriginal dispossession and a labour force which continues to serve European and capitalist interest. But ultimately, under this regime, we were all plucked from families and communities and placed into factories and workplaces which do not, on the whole, have our best interest of living a life of health, well-being and joy at its centre. According to a recent study by the University of New South Wales School of Psychiatry and the Black Dog Institute, burnout costs the Australian economy $14 billion every year. And addressing it at its roots will firstly require us to recognise the complexities and the severity of what it is. And that starts with recognising it's a deeply structural problem and not an individual burden, which also means we are going to have to work together to resolve it. And that managing burnout will look vastly different for First Nations and other intersecting identities. We don't have all the answers. There's no one-size-fits-all approach, but we do know that a key way to eliminate workplace stress is by building healthy interpersonal relationships where people feel safe to bring their whole selves to work. There isn't a single species that can survive in a state of hypervigilance, flooded with stress hormones. It has always been how we evolve in relationship with one another. When I spoke of my family and the many leaders who have gone before me and what made them a leader, it wasn't their resilience or the obstacles they had to overcome. It was their ability to show courage and stand up when it counts, to mobilise and connect people with the gift of story, to be vulnerable and to share a yarn, to listen with curiosity and not judgment. But most importantly, to recognise that we are hardwired to work together, to function in common good in tribes and communities. These are the things that belong at the foundations of addressing burnout. Dr. Bruce McGuinness and Arnie Almathorpe were and still are formidable Aboriginal leaders and thinkers. They championed Aboriginal self-determination and the Black Power movement in Victoria, and their legacies created Aboriginal health services. Thanks to them, we can learn a lot about what makes happy and healthy communities. They, along with many other leaders, taught us that health and well-being isn't just the absence of disease in our community, nor the physical well-being of an individual. It is the social, emotional, and spiritual well-being of the entire community in which everyone can achieve their full potential. And so I'm asking you all to show leadership, to take care and be brave, and invest in building healthy, safe communities in your workplaces. And for this to be truly impactful, this has to be more than some meaningless mandate, but instead a larger social movement. Thank you.